Look, I know what you're thinking. You're sitting there, probably scrolling through your phone, maybe waiting for something to actually grab your attention. And you're probably thinking, I'm just another urban explorer looking for a bit of clout. I get it. We've all seen the videos. The guys breaking into abandoned malls. The flashlights shaking in the dark. The "did you hear that?" fake out. But I'm telling you, I went into that storage unit on 4th Street just to flip some vintage equipment. I didn't go there to find whatever that thing is. It started with a sound. It wasn't a scream or a crash. It was a low-frequency hum that seemed to vibrate my teeth before I even laid eyes on the object. You know that feeling when a subwoofer is turned up so high it makes your chest cavity feel like it's going to cave in? It was like that, but cold. It was a sterile, mechanical sound that felt like my brain was trying to tune into a radio station that didn't exist in this reality. The storage unit was one of those old, rusted out ones on the edge of town, the kind where the metal doors are permanently buckled and the smell of wet cardboard and ozone hangs in the air. I had the key. The landlord had given it to me. Said the previous renter had skipped town 10 years ago and never paid the balance. It was supposed to be filled with old camera gear. Maybe some lenses, some lighting rigs I could strip for parts. When I pushed the door up, the screech of metal against metal echoed down the row of units like a dying animal. It was pitch black inside. I clicked on my high-lumen flashlight and started scanning. Boxes of rotting paper, a busted tripod, a mannequin torso missing its head, standard stuff. But then, tucked away in the back left corner, sitting on a workbench that looked like it had been carved from obsidian, was the machine. It wasn't just an old tape deck. It was a monstrous piece of analog hardware, wires spilling out of its side like intestines, connected to a reel-to-reel player that looked like it had been salvaged from a government facility or something weirder. And it was humming. I hadn't plugged it into anything. There was no power running to the unit. Yet, the reels were slowly, agonizingly, inching forward. I stepped closer, and that's when the smell hit me. It wasn't mold. It smelled like ionized air, like the ozone after a massive lightning strike, mixed with something copper-heavy, like blood. I reached out, my hand trembling, not because I was scared, not yet, but because the air around the machine was freezing. My breath started to mist in front of my face. I should have turned around. I should have walked back to my truck, driven home, and forgotten the address of that storage facility forever. But curiosity? It's a parasite. It eats you from the inside out. I leaned in, and I saw a small, faded sticky note attached to the front of the tape deck. It had one word written on it in frantic, shaky handwriting, unedited. The hum intensified. My ears started to ring with that high-pitched whine you hear right before you pass out. I reached for the play button. My finger hovered over it for a second, and in that moment, the entire world went deathly silent. The wind outside stopped. The crickets in the tall grass died down. Even the sound of my own heartbeat seemed to vanish, replaced by the rhythmic, mechanical thwack 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 of the tape beginning to roll. I wasn't recording, but the machine was. And as the first few frames flickered into existence on the tiny, glowing monitor attached to the side, I saw something that made my stomach drop into my shoes. It was a video of me, right now, standing in the dark, looking at the machine, holding my flashlight. But in the video, I wasn't alone. Standing right behind me, just inches from my neck, was a figure made of nothing but static and long, spindly fingers that were slowly reaching out to touch my shoulder. I whipped around, swinging my light, heart slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. There was nothing there, just the dark, empty storage unit. I looked back at the screen. The figure in the video was still there, and now it was leaning in, its mouth opening to reveal a dark, infinite void where its face should have been. The audio kicked in then. It wasn't speech. It was the sound of 1,000 people whispering my name, all at once, in perfect, terrifying unison. I didn't run. I don't know why. Maybe it was pure, unadulterated shock that froze the muscles in my legs. But I stayed there, staring at that flickering, grainy screen. The creature in the video, the thing made of static and malice, was still reaching for me. In the recording, my back was turned, but my posture had changed. My shoulders were slumped, and I was holding my breath, just like I was doing in real life. The machine let out a sharp, metallic click. The video on the screen didn't stop. It just cut to a new angle. Now, the view was from the perspective of the ceiling, looking down at the workbench. It was impossible. There was no camera mounted there, no hidden tech in the rafters. Yet, there it was, me, standing in the center of the unit, and the empty space behind me. But it wasn't empty anymore. The static in the video started to condense, swirling together like ink dropped into clear water, forming a silhouette. It didn't look human. It looked like a shadow cast by something that didn't exist in our dimension, jagged and impossibly tall. It moved with a jittery, frame-by-frame fluidity, like a broken stop-motion animation. It crept closer to the me on the screen, its long, spindly fingers extending toward my neck. My own hand flew to my shoulder instinctively. I could feel a prickle of cold, like a spider crawling over my skin. I spun around again, shining the flashlight into every corner. But the unit was barren, just cardboard, dust, and that suffocating, dead air. "What the hell is this?" I whispered. My voice sounded thin, pathetic, swallowed instantly by the walls. The machine answered. The speaker let out a burst of white noise, followed by a sound that made my skin crawl. It was my own voice, but pitch shifted down into a deep, guttural growl. "Don't. Look away." I stumbled back, my heel catching on a stray piece of lumber, and I went down hard. The flashlight skittered across the floor, its beams spinning wildly before settling on the far wall. The light caught something I hadn't noticed before. Scratch marks. Thousands of them, carved into the concrete. Not just random gouges, but patterns. They looked like tally marks. Hundreds, maybe thousands of them, etched over and over until the concrete was shredded. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the flashlight, and pointed it back at the machine. The screen had changed again. It was showing a close-up of my face. The resolution was unnaturally high, capturing every pore, every bead of sweat on my forehead. My eyes were wide, darting around in terror. I looked like a prey animal caught in a trap. And then, the me on the screen started to speak. But I wasn't speaking. I was watching my mouth move. But the words coming out were in a language I didn't recognize, a harsh, rhythmic series of clicks and whistles that sounded like wind whipping through a canyon. "The cut is live," the voice said, suddenly shifting back into English. I reached for the power cord, desperate to kill the machine, to stop the cycle. But there was no cord. The machine didn't have a plug. It was drawing power from something else, something under the table. I dropped to my knees and tore away the rotting plywood skirting of the workbench. There was no battery, no generator. There was just a hole in the floor, a jagged, dark opening leading into the dirt beneath the foundation. And inside the hole, glowing with a faint, sickly violet light, was a series of human teeth. Not just a few, hundreds of them, arranged in a perfect circle, pulsing with a rhythmic light that matched the hum of the tape machine. I scrambled back, my breath hitching in my throat. I've heard plenty of messed up stories in my time, done the research for my channel, but this wasn't a story. This was a violation of everything I understood about the world. I looked back at the screen. The figure in the video had stopped reaching for me. It was standing directly behind the me on the screen, and it was holding a pair of rusted, heavy-duty film shears. It raised them, the blades glinting in the dark, and began to cut the air around my neck. Every time the blades closed in the video, I felt a sharp, burning sensation on my skin. I reached up and pulled my hand away, and my palm was smeared with blood. I wasn't just watching the video. I was connected to it. The machine was editing my life, and it was starting to prune away the parts it didn't like. I needed to leave. I turned and ran for the door, but the metal door had slammed shut. I grabbed the handle and hauled on it with everything I had, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like it was welded shut from the outside. I hammered on the steel, screaming for help, but the silence outside was absolute. And then, the hum in the room shifted. It grew into a deafening roar, a sound of grinding metal and tearing reality. The screen on the machine turned white, and I heard a voice, not from the speaker, but from the very air around me. The roar died down as quickly as it had started, leaving a ringing in my ears so intense I thought my eardrums had ruptured. I stood there, panting, gripping the cold steel of the storage unit door. My fingers were slick with sweat and the blood from my neck. I wiped the blood on my jeans, but it didn't stop flowing. It wasn't a deep cut, just a shallow, stinging graze. But the blood refused to clot. It just kept weeping, a steady, rhythmic drip that matched the thwack 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 of the machine behind me. I forced myself to turn around. The workbench, the machine, the hole in the floor, they were still there. But the atmosphere had shifted. The air was no longer cold. It was thick, humid, and smelled like a decaying cellar. I noticed that the cardboard boxes, which had been neatly stacked when I arrived, were now scattered across the floor, ripped open as if something had been tearing through them in a blind, violent rage. But I hadn't touched them. "Okay," I muttered, my voice cracking. "Okay, keep it together. You're losing it. Just get out." I grabbed a heavy crowbar from the floor, jammed it into the crack between the door and the frame, and pushed. My muscles burned, the metal groaned, and for a split second, I saw a sliver of the outside world, the parking lot, the dim orange glow of the streetlights. But before I could force it open, something slammed against the door from the outside. Not a person, not a hand. It was a heavy, dull thud, like a side of beef hitting the floor. Then came the scratching. Sharp, rhythmic, methodical. It moved from the bottom of the door to the top, then back down again. I backed away, the crowbar raised like a weapon. The machine on the workbench let out a low, mournful tone. I glanced over. The screen was no longer showing me. It was showing my bedroom, back at my apartment. My clothes were on the floor, the lamp was on, and my laptop was open on the desk, exactly where I'd left it. But it wasn't empty. A shadow was moving across my bedroom wall. It was the same jagged, stop-motion entity from the storage unit. It was walking toward my bed, its movements jerky and unnatural. I watched, paralyzed, as it leaned over my sleeping form, or what looked like my sleeping form. Wait, if I was here, in the unit, who was in my bed? I felt a surge of nausea so strong I almost fell over. I looked closer at the screen. The thing in my bed sat up. It turned its head, and it had my face. Not a mask, it was me. It looked at the camera, smiled a smile that was too wide, too sharp, and winked. Then, it stood up and walked toward the door of my room, holding a camera of its own. "No," I whispered. "That's not me. That's not real." I swung the crowbar at the machine. The metal head connected with the screen, shattering the glass into a spiderweb of cracks. Sparks showered the workbench, and the machine let out a high-pitched, electronic shriek. The light in the room flickered and died. I stood in the darkness, chest heaving, listening for a sound. Anything. Silence. I clicked my flashlight back on. The machine was destroyed. The screen was shattered, the tape reels were mangled, and the wiring was torn to shreds. I let out a jagged, hysterical laugh. It was over. I had smashed the thing. Whatever curse, whatever hallucination, it was done. I walked back to the door, feeling confident for the first time in an hour. I threw my weight against it again. This time, it didn't just budge, it flew open. I stumbled out into the cool night air, the smell of rain and gasoline filling my lungs. I didn't look back. I sprinted to my truck, scrambled into the driver's seat, and didn't stop until I pulled into my driveway. I ran inside, locked the front door, and locked the deadbolt. I collapsed on my couch, my heart finally beginning to slow down. I was home. It was safe. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and started to shake. That's when I noticed it. On the kitchen table, sitting right next to my fruit bowl, was a small, analog tape reel. The exact same kind from the unit. I froze. I didn't touch it. I just stared at it, my hand trembling so hard I dropped my glass. It shattered on the floor, but I didn't even look at the mess. I walked over to the table and saw that the reel had a small label on it. Written in that same frantic, shaky handwriting, it said, "The Unedited Cut, Take 3. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, and I had a notification from my YouTube channel. A new video had been uploaded. It was titled The Unedited Cut. I clicked it with shaking fingers. The video started to play. It was a shot of me, right now, standing in my kitchen, looking at the tape on my table. Behind me, the front door, the one I had just locked, was slowly, silently beginning to creak open. The door creaked open, but nobody was standing there. Just the dark hallway of my apartment building, empty and unnervingly quiet. I stared at the screen, then at the door, then back at the screen. The me in the video was doing exactly what I was doing, frozen, terrified, looking at the door. But then, the version of me on the screen started to back away. He looked terrified, eyes wide, breathing heavy. I, however, wasn't moving. I was standing there, glued to the spot. That was the moment I realized the truth. The tape wasn't recording me. It was writing me. My own body suddenly lurched backward, completely against my will. My legs moved with that same jerky, stop-motion twitch I'd seen on the screen. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My jaw locked, my throat constricted, and I was forced, step by agonizing step, into the hallway. The front door slammed shut behind me, locking me out. I frantically clawed at the handle, but my fingers wouldn't coordinate. They felt like they belonged to someone else. I wasn't in control of my own flesh anymore. I was a puppet, and the invisible editor behind the lens was calling the shots. I heard a sound. From the end of the hallway, the thwack, thwack, thwack of the reel-to-reel tape. It was coming from the shadows. I was dragged down the hall, my feet sliding across the carpet. I reached the stairwell, and the door was propped open. Inside, the wall was covered in the same tally marks I'd seen in the storage unit. Thousands of them. And beneath the graffiti, sitting on the concrete landing, was a new device. It wasn't the broken machine from before. This one was pristine, glowing with that same sickly violet light. It was editing my life in real time. I watched, horrified, as a shadow emerged from the darkness. It was the figure, the jagged, towering mess of static. It held a pair of film shears that seemed to be made of pure, concentrated shadow. "Stop!" I finally managed to croak out. My voice sounded thin, like it was coming from a long distance away. "Please stop." The figure didn't stop. It raised the shears. I looked up at the ceiling, where a single security camera sat, its red light blinking. That was the lens. That was the director. I realized then that there was no way to destroy it, because I was the film. And a film isn't finished until the final cut is made. The figure stepped forward, its movements nauseatingly fast, then agonizingly slow. It reached out, and those spindly, static-filled fingers wrapped around my throat. I felt the pressure, not the crushing weight of hands, but the freezing, hollow sensation of being erased. "Take 4, a voice whispered. It sounded like a mixture of my own voice and 1,000 others, layered over each other in a cacophony of digital distortion. The The figure brought the shears to the air just inches from my neck. I saw the flash of silver. I realized then that this wasn't an urban legend. It wasn't a curse. It was a cycle. Every time someone found that tape, every time someone became obsessed with the unedited cut of their own life, they were just another frame added to a never-ending reel of suffering. The entity wasn't a monster. It was an editor, and it had been looking for a perfect performance. The blades closed. For a split second, the world turned white. I didn't feel pain. I felt nothing. I felt the deletion of my memories, the erasure of my name, the cutting away of every moment I had ever lived. My childhood, the smell of my mother's cooking, the feeling of the sun on my face, it was all being trimmed, sliced, and tossed onto the cutting room floor. The screen in my mind went black. I'm sitting here now, staring at you. Or maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm just a memory of a guy who thought he was a creator. If you're watching this, if you're reading this script, it means the footage has been distributed. You're the new audience. And the machine? It's looking for a new lead actor. Don't go looking for the silence. Don't go looking for the unedited version of your life. Because once you start paying attention to the cracks in reality, once you start trying to edit your own story, you'll realize that the director has been watching you the whole time. And the next cut? It might be yours. The tape ends here. There is no more footage, just the static. And if you're still listening, that static? That's not a sound effect. That's the machine starting to record.